Cominciamo allora. Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session entitled Fake News and Peace Journalism. The subject of fake news and peace journalism is really topical, and as usual, the Rimini meeting is able to focus on critical issues. This summer, there have been a lot of fake news, a lot of criticism. Perhaps the most important, or one of the most important politicians in the world, that is the President of the United States, officially launched a crusade against fake news. And half of the world journalism launched a crusade against him. Yesterday, I listened to Mr. Tajani here at the Rimini meeting, and he also mentioned fake news. So politicians talk a lot about fake news, and honestly, we as journalists feel a bit of this kind of discomfort about this. Over the last few years, apparently there has been greater freedom, as the greatest sociologist in the last few years, that is Bauman, who wrote information is not related to the news anymore. We are in a sort of information dust, where content is not the main part, and there is a lot of influencing factors. So what do we miss? We miss a discernment, to use a term that is very dear to our Pope. We do not have enough education to understand information. That is what we're going to talk about this morning, fake news and peace journalism, which is also the document of the latest writing of Pope Francis on occasion of the Day on Social Communication. And it had the same title, Fake News and Peace Journalism. Here at the meeting, in the bookshop, there is a book collecting a number of comments to this message of Pope Francis. And the comment by Ivan Maffeis, Father Ivan, impressed me because he cites a sentence by Hannah Arendt. You know who Hannah Arendt was, student of Heidegger, great philosopher, and she wrote in her great essay, The Origin of Totalitarianism, that the ideal subjugate to a totalitarian regime is not the fully fledged communist or Nazist, but it is the individual for whom the distinction between reality and fake, from real and fake, does not exist anymore. These words really make us think a lot. There's some truth in this, unfortunately, and this is all the more evident today, which is profoundly different compared to the time of Arendt, and at the same time we feel these comments are close. The Pope said in his message for social communication, how can we defend ourselves? How can we defend ourselves from fake news? The most radical antidote to the virus of what is false is to be pervaded by truth, but for us, truth is not something that can be defined. It is a relationship. Getting free of the false and looking for truth. These are the two ingredients that are fundamental so that our words and our gestures can be real, reliable, and trustworthy. Here with us today, there's 3 editors-in-chief and an expert that has studied this issue a lot. Well, for us, the challenge is enormous. because here we're talking about a profession that should be at the service of the others. I have loved this job as many others have done, because this is really a craft. It's really a job that is designed to serve the others when it is done as it should be done. Over the years, it has been seen as a kind of service to the benefit of other citizens, of other people. We have the time to study things and to offer you interpretations of news and information that you do not have. That is the best way, in my view, to experience our job. We are aware that today it is difficult to think about the future of this profession. Unfortunately, the feeling we have is that in the past many important things were done, also in information to help democracy with a fundamental role, but then the future, nobody knows what will happen. So I've taken a lot of time in this introductory part. Every panelist has 15 minutes, and then if we are fast, we can also go through a second round. So I'll give the floor to Lucio Brunelli to begin with. There is a wonderful website of La Stampa that is a Vatican Insider. Andrea Tornielli is the manager. And in preparation of this conference, Lucio interviewed Andrea Metalli about this subject. Really, it is a very interesting subject, fake news and peace journalism. In particular, and I'm telling this to Lucio Brunelli, you know that he is the news director of TV 2000 and InBlu Radio. So this is a very important responsibility also for reporting all the life of the church in Italy and in the world. The church itself was subject to fake news. Well, yes, it was object and victim, a target. There's two pictures that come to my mind that are emblematic when we talk about fake news around the figure of a pope. The first one was published soon after the election of Bergoglio, a priest who looks like Bergoglio, giving the communion to General Videla, the Argentinian dictator, as to assume a kind of complicity with the Argentinian dictatorship with 30,000 desaparecidos. Nobody knows who circulated that picture, but then Michael Moore confirmed the validity of that picture, and he's an important commentarist who did very important jobs. And so there was a lot of authority conveyed to this picture. But then, and this should have been done before publishing it, what was found is that it was not Bergoglio, it was another priest. There's even a video about that service. And the thing that really impressed me is that Michael Moore said sorry, said he was sorry. He realized that it was fake. Well, the picture was real, but the person was the wrong one. So he apologized. And this is something that rarely happens in our world, and this is probably the right thing to do, and this gives credibility to our job. So people make mistakes, and one can say, I am sorry. The other picture, on the other hand, that targeted the image of Ratzinger, it was a young Ratzinger with his arm up as if saluting in the Nazi way. Again, this picture was circulated a lot after his election, as if insinuating that there was a complicity, incredible complicity with the Nazism. And this is interesting because the picture was authentic. but it was just the angle that was distorted. It was a very close up, and just there was a close up, and one could see only his face and his arm up, but by extending it, by enlarging it, one could see that there were two arms up, and then next to him was his brother, a priest, and that picture was taken in 1951 and not in the 30s. At the end of their ordination as priests, and that was the moment when they saluted the faithful present at the service. So in this case, the picture was real, was authentic, but the context, the date, and the details and the angle were fake. So what I want to say here is that fake news are like the evil. They always have some, they're always relevant in terms of the details. And then there's another fake news that I think Lucia Annunziata would have liked to talk about, but I can mention it. There is a piece of news that was very much circulated about Josefa, the woman in Cameroon who remained stranded in the sea for a lot of hours. And that picture was circulated where she had her nails colored. And indeed, she had makeup in her nails, but she had nail varnish, but that was really done purposely to manipulate reality. I mean, that was real, but the picture was shot, and that was not mentioned by the propagator of the fake news, was shot 4 days after she was rescued. But those who circulated the picture in the social media wanted to demonstrate that the whole rescue was fake, because a woman that is rescued after being 48 hours stranded in the ocean cannot really have nail polish. So that was to attack the whole operation, rescue operation. That image really impressed a lot of people, struck a lot of people. Again, in this case, we're talking about an authentic picture, but alterated in a way because the context was missing there. There was no date, no reference to the settings, so the nail polish was applied by the rescuers just to, as a gesture of friendship, just to make her feel happy, to make her feel a woman again, to pay tribute to her. Alessandro referred to the message by the Pope, and one of the things that I found in that message that I think is really interesting is this. It was published at the beginning of this year for the Day of the Social Communication, and he wondered whether fake news are so successful in terms of circulation. He says that the efficacy of fake news is due to their mimetic nature. That is, they look plausible, and the fake part is found in the details. He says that the fake news, the first fake news of history, is that about the serpent with Eve. And there's details here that are interesting. He says that the snake, the serpent, talks to Eve with something that is true, but only partly true. He says that it is true that God said that you should not feed on any tree in the garden. And so here, from singular to plural, the image of God changes. it looks like a God that prohibits any kind of need and pleasure for human beings. Instead, he prohibited just one tree. So already in the question there is a manipulation. So consider the importance of details again. Pope Bergoglio is the victim of fake news on a daily basis. There's no need to make a list of it and to complain about it, but two very good colleagues from Avvenire, Neroscavo and Roberto Beretta, published a book where about 80 fake news were selected, and it is interesting to go through them, and I think that the book is available at the bookshop here at the Rimini meeting. Some are really incredible, that there's the shape of a shadow in the form of evil, the night of the election, and so many people believe that. That's also interesting. And then the original picture was found, and again it was found that it was really a picture with alterations. Then there's other fake news that are more elaborate, and so they're more tricky about the figure of the Pope, because they mix what is true and what is false, and so they are more difficult to detect, and they may alter the perception of those who are in favor of certain subjects. So those that are most serious are these. The first one, you may remember, last Christmas 2017, the Pope mentioned that Jesus was a refugee, that the Holy Family was made of refugees, and the issue of migration was really under the spotlight at the time, just as today, and a big scandal was set up saying that the Pope violated a tradition, that he was ignorant in terms of knowing the Bible, and so online blogs and many newspapers refer to this. It is true that the Pope used this phrase, but again, the detail that was omitted is crucial, that he is not the one who made up this expression. All the popes used it, and Ratzinger probably has the copyright for this phrase. He mentioned this repeatedly in the Angelus of the 17th of January 2011. He says, the Messiah, the Son of God, was a refugee. But if we were to suspect that Ratzinger also is a modernist, even Pius XII wrote an entire essay about it. The Holy Family were exiled and they migrated to Egypt to flee from the violence of a king, and this is a kind of support that we can take to all the migrants, and it would be interesting to propose this again today. I did select many others, but you will let me know how much time I have left. 5 more minutes. Then who am I to judge? Again, this is a question by Pope Francis, and there's details that were omitted. That's not a question, actually. I was present. We were returning from the first GMG from Rio de Janeiro, and that was the first press conference on a flight. The journalists couldn't believe it, even Father Lombardi. So they said, so we can ask questions, and the Pope said, you can ask anything you want. So there was a kind of self-censorship among the journalists, because there were so many hot topics on which nobody wanted to focus. And eventually, a Brazilian journalist that was not a Vatican insider and asked a question about the gay lobby in the Vatican. So we all jumped on our seats. Whoa, a gay lobby in the Vatican. We never asked the Pope if a gay lobby exists and how to address it, because there were news already towards the end of the pontificate of Papa Ratzinger that there was a gay lobby, and again at that time we were at the beginning of the other pontificate. So the question was not what is the judgment of the church on the homosexual condition, but what do you think and how do you think you will address the issue of a gay lobby in the Vatican? That was the last question after 1 hour of free interview with the aircraft that was going through turbulence. He was standing with his Italian, that is not our Italian. So he first said that there is a lot of rumors about the gay lobby, but I never found anybody in the Vatican giving me their identity card saying, here is the gay lobby. So playing a joke, but then seriously, there must be a distinction between being a gay person and being a lobby, because not all the lobbies are good. So this is a really strict judgment about the lobby, provided it exists in the Vatican. And as a premise to this very strict judgment, he said, well, one has to make a distinction. If a person is gay and looks for God and is of a goodwill person, who am I to judge this person? We do not have to exclude these persons because of their condition. The problem is not to have this trend, this tendency, but not to be part of lobbies that try to make pressure like others. And so this was quite interesting, but then it was brutalized and said, which said the Pope, gay people, who am I to judge? So a big part of the Catholic, for a big part of the Catholic world, this was the manifesto of a relativist Bergoglio. That is a Pope that gives up in providing an objective judgment, but rather it was the opposite. This is the message that united right Catholic part, so to say, and a progressive press to propose this image of the relativist Pope. And of course, the passage, well, if a person is a gay and looks for God and is a goodwill, who am I to judge? Well, this honestly is totally consistent with the Catholic tradition and with a Christian sense, with a Christian feeling. Okay, I think that's enough. And then if we have more time later, I will talk about peace journalism. Thank you.
Grazie Lucio.
Thank you very much, Lucio. Now the floor goes to the director of Fanpage, the third most read electronic paper in Italy. And so Francesco Piccinini, director of and editor-in-chief of Fanpage.it. Well, you're in charge of such an important website, and very often in the web world, well, credibility doesn't go hand in hand with the willingness to have many likes and clicks, and sometimes even newspapers well, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, publish things that, as Solzhenitsyn said, we should not have the right to know. But sometimes things just end up on the websites because the desire to get many clicks seem to sort of go beyond any journalist related purpose. Well, to me, fake news do not exist. Well, and the idea of fake news as being a reality is simply because a paradigm change has not been accepted. American epistemologist was not sort of the same line as Popper on other theories. Well, he made a theory about a paradigm change. And I can tell you sort of this because over 6 years of experience, we just had 2 cases of so-called fake news, considering that we publish 350 items per day, while it's a rather negligible rate. So fake news do not exist because those who check the news distribution supply chain have changed. So there's a watershed in 2008, and it didn't happen by accident in 2008. That was the year of the big crisis, and there was a sort of separation and a split between, on the one hand, the public, and on the other hand, who managed these news feeds. And it is devastating. And those that had sort of paid for subprimes for their houses just end up with nothing. So that marks a break in society. And then there are the arrival of Facebook and of the iPhone. This is a case study because until 2006, the turnover of big newspapers reaches a peak. So Google was born in 98 and the web in 94, and still newspapers keep sort of growing their numbers, because up to then the news distribution supply chain was in the hands of the media. Popper asked for a license for people making television. He said that people that make television should have a license, should have a specific permit and qualification authorization. And I mean, for instance, even for networks, you need some consensus. So for papers, newspapers, so the distribution chain is very much controlled. Well, and Facebook disrupts the setting, because anybody can publish a piece of news. True, false, it doesn't matter. True, fake, it doesn't matter. The thing is that the main news distribution hub is not in the hands of newspapers any longer. This is disruptive. If you take a look of how much time people spend on YouTube, Google, or Facebook, the rates are incredible. We spend so much more time on Facebook, YouTube, and other social media, much more than reading a newspaper. So the places where public information takes forms, changes. What Habermas writes on 62 about the influence of media is up to date, even though old, because he wrote about papers, Habermas. Now we have platforms, but the content is the same, the idea is the same, and anybody can become a distribution hub simply with a smartphone. And it's not the first time that something like that happens in history. The real problem is how journalists cope with that. And as a journalist, I can tell you, well, journalists somehow, well, I'd always thought to be those with truth in their hands. And okay, we heard about thousands of cases of fake news, designs on purpose. Think about the use of propaganda also in Italy, and the use of propaganda-related news to promote a certain propaganda. Well, today when we talk about fake news, we talk about this. Propaganda, but then there's something else. In order to be effective, propaganda needs 2 things. On the one hand, a lot of competence by those making it up. So if somebody publishes a meme against Laura Boldrini, for instance, is that a person that is going to be an impact? No, not at all, because in order for a message to have a big impact, the same message needs to be seen at least 3 times. This message redundancy on internet is almost impossible. It's really impossible to end up on the same meme of Laura Boldrini for 3 times. It seems complicated, but it's like that. So, because it would be very rare. So you need to create fake news on a regular basis, and behind that you can only have a propaganda machine. So then the clash is not between information bodies with the poles and extremes. I give some news and you give others, but between power blocks that disseminate specific memes. Last year, a piece of research work was published, and that was based on a very wrong, totally wrong methodology. And according to this research, the fake news had only an 8% impact on public opinion. So this is one of the most absurd sort of methodologies. And well, a scientific research on information has never been more surreal and absurd than that. Let's make an example. Il Cursario della Sera is a website, and we try to compare its audience compared with Il Corriere della Sera, but actually you should measure the reach rate of Facebook messages, and there you can't measure that because you cannot measure the number of clicks. Social media and Facebook in particular can measure that. They are the only ones. So and so that's why I say that the paradigm is changing, because we still look at this century with the glasses, so to speak, of the previous century. And so that's why we can't see properly. We have a blurred vision. It's like if I was reading sort of something with the wrong glasses, not suitable for my sight problem. Again, we should change glasses. We should see reality through a different lens, the appropriate lens. But this is not a new topic. I mean, any period of time, any era, when it is marked by something disruptive, like the invention of radio at the beginning of the 20th century, well, reacts with some sort of groups that are reluctant. This is normal. This is a normal reaction. Because, for instance, in 1922, Lippmann writes, what man does is not based on direct and certain knowledge of what he knows and sees, but on the basis of the images he gets. 1922. So, well, this topic is still up to date as the formation of the state-nation concept, or as a concept of public opinion. However, in order to reorganize public opinion, you need people who are good enough to use a specific methodology. For instance, let's think about a recent electoral campaign, and there was some news about a candidate, and well, the opposite candidate, the adversary, disseminated a specific piece of news. And what happened? I mean, what did the adversary? Well, it simply sort of published that piece of news and then somehow expressed solidarity. And then all that was referred to by other media. This is the classical news design process. So it's not a top-down process. So it's not a top-down distribution pattern. This is a bottom-up distribution pattern. So I create something, I publish it, I post it, and then the media will go back to it. Because sometimes, well, there are also very sort of rushed times, and so time is very much contracted. So again, a piece of news is published, and then it goes on, and it keeps being disseminated and disseminated, and again and again and again distributed. And then there is the so-called epic win. So actually, the adversary of somebody publishes something that is a half fake news, and then expresses support, endorses that, and so it cuts out a good figure somehow. He sort of looks like being a respectable person, and that changes totally the paradigm. So, because usually we have thought that the paradigm was top-down, so somebody on top, controlling and using media to distribute and disseminate news. Well, that was true in the 20th century. Now in the 21st century, we have a bottom-up news distribution and creation pattern. But let's be careful. These propaganda hubs are the real issue. And this is how, I mean, you could win battles. I mean, it's not just a matter of sort of having radio versus TV and TV versus radio. You need to play on the same field. And I think that in our century, this is going to be one of the most important topics. It may sound absurd, but we had similar change in terms of entity with the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took many more years to change the social setting of a country. Here we talk about just 10 years. We had Brexit, we had Trump, and it's not over yet, we don't know. And all that comes from propaganda hubs. It has been proved. And either we decide to stay aside or we can try to tackle this issue. This is one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. Well, I think that we need to try to tame the tiger and do our best. And we need skills and being competent. And you can fight against fake news with knowledge, with skills. I think that Fidel Castro has died at least 20 times over the last 20 years, and then he finally really died. However, an important Italian newspapers, sort of for a couple of hours, sort of opens both the website and the next day the newspaper main page to say that it seems that Fidel Castro died. Well, it seems either you are dead or you are not. Well, nevertheless, Los Diarios Americanos gave the news. It's a website of Cuban refugees in Miami, and anybody knows that is not reliable. If you are competent and you know that that source is not reliable, you won't disseminate a piece of news published by that not reliable source. And of course, that's the point. Thank you very much indeed to Mr. Piccinini and his thoughts that are very much provoking. So what about taming the tiger? Bruno Mastroianni is trying to do so. He's a social media manager of different Rai shows. He wrote a book, and today at 4, for those who are interested, is going to be presented with Veragena at the Book Corner here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. It's called Tienilo Acceso, Keep It Switched On, so the brains. So share, post, and distribute. And so linking him up with what Mr. Piccinini said, now we're going to listen to Bruno Mastroianni. So Bruno Mastroianni suggests us to be part of this world, to try to tame the tiger. And if we listen to Piccinini's sort of words, it's the world of the big propaganda hubs like Cambridge Analytics that somehow try to do something more than fake news, going beyond. Thank you very much. So I would like, again, as Mr. Piccinini did, to say something against the word fake news, because this has become a rhetoric tool. We have mentioned Trump. Trump says that media create fake news, and the media try to debunk what Trump says. So, well, the fake news topic has become an argument to try to debunk the words of the opposite, of the opponent. Even in the football world, I mean, football supporters are using this word fake news to try to oppose the argument of one's opponent in any sector. And this is very risky because, I mean, then we risk to simplify sort of reality too much, and we risk simply to reduce everything to true versus false. And even in the political world, we have sort of these binary expressions, as Giovanna Cosenza says, all the others are lying, I'm the only one who tells the truth. So everything seems to be about a total dichotomy. So it's either with me or against me. So if you accept this way of communicating, if you adopt this communication style, then you end up dividing reality into two parts, right or wrong, true and false. But actually, we need to look carefully at phenomena, and Mr. Brunelli at the beginning said it clearly. So the pictures of Ratzinger as he was a young Nazi, it's a true picture, but it was then sort of presented in a misleading way. So it was somehow manipulated, and also the sort of so-called picture of Bergoglio actually was not about Bergoglio, and also the photo of the refugee and so on. Again, let's go beyond that, because how can you present truth? What is true? How can you sort of describe it and illustrate it? Because today, war is not a fake news. I mean, it's not something that he simply talks about. Here we have somehow something deeper. We as humans, we tend to consider what we believe in as good and true, and the other way around. So the idea of a young Ratzinger that when he was younger could embrace some Nazi-like ideas is plausible because, well, when you're young, maybe you can do stupid things, and then he's German and so on, and then it was debunked right after. But, well, today some people still think that Ratzinger, when he was younger, had Nazi-like ideas because the people stick to their idea of the world, to their own vision of the world. But let's talk about Bauman instead of fake news. And so let's go back to another concept, that of the information dust. I would like to talk about chaos instead of information dust. We are all part of the public debate. We all had access to information. We all have access to information. We can all publish and post information and news. I mean, the past scenario is over. There are no more news and information distribution hubs. Anybody can publish news and information, and the other way around. Now there are people and entities that are investing in a smart way, in a sort of targeted way. So we should try to react differently at different levels. We should consider, on the one hand, each one of us as users, because of course we are also part of these public debates through tools that we can keep in our pockets, and so we take part in all this. So we should consider not only the tool and put it in the pocket, but we should put in the pocket also some responsibility. But also, on the other hand, we should consider the so-called journalism for peace. What is this peace journalism? What do I mean by that? I really like what has been read about Pope Francis' message about how to protect oneself. Well, by protecting the idea of truth and through relations. This is incredibly surprising because from a specific technical point of view of social media, this is so targeted. So Pope Francis knows social media rather well. I don't see him spending all these days on Facebook, but he understands how humans work and function, and he says, so I have the honor of being in a panel with the directors of papers, but I think that we should change our sort of key. I mean, you distribute reliable, credible, well done sort of contents, but this is only 50% of the work. well, then you need to do more, because then that content will generate debates and discussions and manipulations, rebellions, disagreements, and then when you see the comments that are published and are so aggressive, and there should be more moderation on that. There should be, somebody sort of trying to moderate the debate. And sometimes there are contents that are not that accurate, because if you publish something that is not certain, then you simply sort of generate an endless debate. It's like sort of giving people weapons and somehow sort of encouraging them to fight, and then say, it's not my fault then if people end up beating each other roughly and sort of violently. So again, we should consider for each content, for each place where contents are disseminated and published, there should be media manager then managing those discussions and trying to moderate the climate. And very often I'm being told when I say so, oh, there are people that are so stubborn they do not want to understand. Well, I experienced that personally as social media manager. If you moderate, if you respond even to the most violent and most aggressive, little by little, you see that you can encourage instead those who are moderate and they really want to exchange. Because if you let these violent people talk and dominate, well, everything is going to be useless. Instead, if you moderate the debate and keep under control these violent people, you then encourage all the others. For instance, on the account of the great history of Rai 3 network, I see it every day. There are sometimes users that are very violent and aggressive. Even very serious historic matters are discussed and presented. And if you work on that, if you allow anybody express their opinion, sometimes you ask people to reformulate without being offensive, and you respond in a competent way, providing reference links and data. Maybe really the hater won't be convinced, but at least you can allow sort of the silent multitude to talk and being heard and voice their opinions, because there are plenty of people that have plenty of interesting opinions, but they do not give any signs online, because those are the most reflective people, those who are thinkers, people that question themselves, sometimes even in a radical way, as haters. And again, we always talk about haters, but how can a person can be defined as a hater? Maybe it's just an angry person with lots of problems, or a person who is having just a moment of sort of violence. Okay, so there are some very normal people, so to speak, that do not want to join those debates, because they understand that sometimes only the hater seems to dominate. And so very often, well, of course, the hater will keep its opinion, will remain aggressive, and won't change his minds. But I think that instead, these sort of silent multitude can give a positive contribution. For instance, there was a debate about vaccine, and I remember a chart about the death provoked by, for instance, measles, and there were some data that were published and that were quite worrying. And I remember that well, there was some data about the impact of vaccines on measles that were quite controversial, and then a person responded and said that the chart that had been published was not, had not been accompanied by the right sort of caption, and so actually gave an explanation to help people understand the real meaning of that chart. So again, I wasn't competent enough to provide that explanation, but fortunately a person gave this explanation and helped many other people understand. So managing the interaction in order to favor the voicing of the silent multitude is really what Taming the Tiger is about. And again, we cannot solve in a linear way a problem that is not linear at all. This is a network issue, and so you cannot fix it with a top-down approach. Okay, saying we should only have perfect newspaper controlled online. No, you can't. You need to consider the structure of the network with so many players. A network problem should be fixed within the network. Journalists should do their part. Many already are trying to do their best work. Not only the people who are here with me within this panel, so these sort of papers, but other sort of entities like some websites and bloggers. They're really trying to follow the debates and moderate them and control them in somehow. But so I mean, journalists has always been seen as watchdogs of democracies, and this is one of the most important tasks of journalists. I also wanted to become of watchdogs, well, always related to dogs. And then you have sort of bloodhounds. I mean, the fact of proposing to the public something that was hidden and unknown. And then you have shepherd dogs. So together with the watchdog, together with the bloodhound, you have the shepherd dog. You need then somebody who keeps the herd together, a shepherd dog that can really try to somehow sort of help keeping the herd under control. Say journalism that helps readers so to find their bearings in that information conundrum that is all around. So, and this is what Taming the Tiger is about. But sometimes this is not enough. I mean, and moreover, journalists should do it, but it's a big task. And who else should do that? Because this is part of their ethics, of their deontology, of their DNA, but also all the others should do the same. Culture Institute, institutions, universities, the Accademia della Crusca. We have a Verageno that manages the Accademia della Crusca account. Again, then there is a discussion. There are people that can rebel, can ask the wrong questions. Others can say, oh no, this is not true. And okay, because even linguistic questions are very important. You need always to consider what is being sort of disseminated. Again, this is a pattern that should be applied to anything. So it's a social challenge, it's a network challenge. If we really want social peace, we need to build it when we tame the tiger. But each one of us should try to tame their own tiger. And again, in our book, and maybe we can talk about that at the presentation of the book this afternoon, we have tried, of course, to do something that could be useful also for a user, because we're all users and we have all become little to public figures. Because, I mean, each opinion can have an impact on a certain number of people. And so we need to consider also the responsibility that comes with it, because any online deed can have an impact all around. So there is a sort of educational sort of world to be considered. We should educate people, train people in schools, in workplaces, and try to sort of try to be human beings living up sort of the situation and trying to sort of really be able to tame the tiger we are talking about. Thank you very much, Bruno. I'm very happy to sort of introduce to you Marco Tarquinio, Director of Avvenire. And as to training and information, this is a passive fact, information. But if you're trained, if you're educated, you can make sort of distinctions. Otherwise, you can be the easy prey of fake news. So being educated and trained is important and should go hand in hand with information. And we came from a great history, not in the sense of the sort of TV show Bruno deals with, but I want to refer to our Constitution, Article 21, and we have a beautiful exhibition on this here at the meeting. In Article 21, we are reminded about the right to express one's own opinion, and then this right is embodied and embedded in laws, and the Constitution enshrines that. And pluralism is extremely important, and it is enshrined in the Constitution. The fact of having a newspaper like Avvenire that has been founded 50 years ago is a form of freedom. It's a guarantee of freedom for anybody, for each one of us, for Catholics and non-Catholics. So this is a very important information and education tool. So when you hear absurd things about the press, journalists, newspapers, helps and financial aids for newspapers, but voice is everything. Voice is everything. And a voice like the one of Avvenire is very important because on so many occasions, Avvenire voiced those that otherwise would have had no voice. I'm sure that even if you're going through stormy times, well, it's important to have such a sort of reference point. And I'm certain that Avvenire is in line with the new paradigm, and we still don't know how things will evolve. Nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know about the future, but I'm certain that in the future, big things will happen. And I dream about a future in which Avvenire will still be there for at least another 50 years.
Well, at this stage, I would say goodbye. No, Alessandro explained a lot of things, but thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. We're always present in testifying to this history at the Rimini meeting. Also this history. This is part of reality. I could start talking about fake news and many other cases like this. I could talk about what is in the newspapers, what is not in the newspapers. There's top-down processes, but there's also many storms that are triggered from the bottom. There's parts of reality that are excluded from mainstream narration in our country and in our world, and in our information systems, and in the circulation of news that we experience. So where could we start with? Well, fake news do exist. I am editor-in-chief because there was a fake news about my predecessor. Those who do not know about the case of Feltri will not understand why I have become the editor-in-chief of this newspaper. Fake news do exist. Pope Benedict was referred to with his example. There's many other examples that may be mentioned. So let us consider current times, current topics. There's people that are now undernourished from concentration camp, and these are looked at gym buddies, are defined as gym buddies. Isn't this a fake news? This is not from just the bottom, but also from the top. So I agree with what Mr. Piccinini said. These are propaganda centers that are used the information that we need to circulate certain terms, certain images. So the formation of reality is part of our life, but the big issue today is that it's much faster today, and it's very much more pervasive. This is potentially immense. So the key word in this time is responsibility and choice, as always in the life of men and women. What happens is not just above our head, is part of our life. It depends on us whether we want to live it or not in a decent way, simply a decent way. We choose the words, we choose the way in which we want to run a debate, we decide what kind of information sources we want to refer to, people that we trust, people in whose words we believe and then cite repeatedly. Let's go back to the case of Pope Francis. Evangelii Gaudium would have not mentioned Jesus at all. Somebody wrote this, even wrote this. There were people that repeatedly said what they didn't know, but this was what somebody else had said. I believe that, well, this is not verified, but Pope Francis apparently said that for his own mental hygiene is not reading things. Perhaps he didn't mention that, but I do that. I don't read certain things, but not because I am snobbish and I do not believe in them, but I believe that listening is a fundamental element, as Pope Francis said in his message in 2016. Otherwise, we don't understand reality. So I prefer to listen to other things that maybe shatter me, but I prefer to select, and we have to make choices. And if we don't make choices, there will be others that will make those choices for us, filling our life of rubbish, with rubbish and with hatred. I have a lot of thoughts in my mind. A lot has been said about manipulated news, bad news, false news, fake news. I would like to talk about peace journalism because I've been trying to do this for 50 years now. To me, peace journalism means having people to come to terms with the reality they live in. As the colleague said here, we live in a kind of cloud, in a kind of dust, which is the perception of reality through the mainstream narratives. The dust, that's what it is at the end of the day. The perception of reality is different from the actual reality we live in. I am shocked by the fact that in our country the latest electoral campaign focused on security as an urging issue in our reality. We have a big problem with the mafia. The mafia in Italy do not kill in ferocious ways as we used to know in recent years, but the mafia infects the life of our communities in many ways. And smaller offenses, in terms of small offenses, we are the safest country in the world. We are the only European country that was not attacked by terrorists. We didn't have a terrorist attack, and in the electoral campaign we've been stuck in discussing security problems, giving more weapons to everybody to give a sense of safety. Can you understand how it works and how a distorted perception of reality can work? So be equipped with weapons and be more happy. That is why I really admire my younger colleagues who are more able to use the tools that we too in Avvenire use, that is modern communication. But I'm more and more interested in content and in the way to work to have the people that trust us and buy our newspaper, to have them come to terms with the reality we live in. Because otherwise we destroy it and change it, interpreting it in a way that is different from what it is, and only highlighting the dark side of life, only giving ourselves to the dark side. I do not accept this as a Christian, and I do not accept it as a citizen of this country because of the civilization that Italy can be proud of. Perhaps it is a bit of a utopic thought, considering the things that happen today, but over the last 10 years, more than 40% of newspapers disappeared in Italy. So this is a lack of pluralism. Others were established, such as Fanpage, a good example in online news, but there is a problem with pluralism, as my colleague said, the plurality of voices. Many colleagues are sent away from newsrooms. They are all alone. They don't have the possibility to work in a community, which is the main ingredient of many men and women who work in journalism. This process mirrors what happens in our societies. Everything is going towards isolation. People are more and more isolated. They are behind a screen where there is the illusion of having a more stable relation with other people, even in a very hot debate. So there's isolation, and isolation leads to a sterile situation. And this is all the more relevant to the information world when those who work on behalf of others are left alone because they are more subject to being conditioned. So they have to really follow the trend imposed by others. There's big information centers that control everything. And these involve not just pure business people in information, but they coincide with centers of power. What Mr. Piccinini mentioned, for example, concern big powers in the world scene, using mass media communication to lead other nations towards places they do not want to go to. That's happening. We have to be aware of this, and we have to keep our attention on people in the one-to-one relationship. The truth is in the relationship. Well, Pope Francis shocked me when he first said that, because when he said that, he did that in a letter to Eugenio Scalfari. I had so many fights with Eugenio Scalfari, and to show that truth in the relationship, he talks to the person who is more distant from him. And he was really distant from Pope Francis, accepting that he could say things that are the opposite to what I believe. But with that single gesture, he shows that truth can be really sought, even with those that are so far from us. We know that Eugenio Scalfari is the way he is, but there's nothing we can do about it. But it is admirable what happens between these two people. Truth is a relationship indeed. Well, another fake news was this. When Pope Francis did that, he talked about the reality of relation. The people sighed, here is the evidence that the Pope is relativist. Of course, embodied Christ is a relativist. Is there any other relation that is stronger than this? So it is maybe the time to go back to the basics. I am not a theologian, I am a journalist, but sometimes I see that I need some advice, and there's very good people that can help me and go back to the basics. Maybe I was a little bit confusing in my presentation. I wanted to mention many other things. Perhaps I talked too much, or do I still have some time? Because there's one more point I wanted to make, a couple of minutes. So I'm going to add one more remark. that is really dear to me, and I want to repeat it here because it is a real forum here. There is a big problem in this time, that is the illusion of instant and reliable communication. And we called it the digital forum. But the digital forum still has to come. Is not yet ready. We are at a crossroad. And do you know what is the evidence of this? It is the language, the prevailing language that is used in these channels. It is a trivial language. It is a crossroad that has not turned into a square, into a forum yet. We know that our civilization, our tradition, has always organized itself around a square, around a forum. We can see it in our cities. There is the palace of the power, then there is the church, the cathedral, which is the place of the spirit of a community. So we are in a trivium, we are at a crossroad that have not turned into a forum. Everybody has their own truth, and they keep going, following their own journey, and that's what we see in the head news, getting to some points that are really exaggerated, taking the reader away from the core of the issue that was meant to be addressed. So we need to get out of this kind of system. And how can this be done? The forum should not only include the anger and the loneliness of people participating. Is this a philosophical approach in an exaggerated way? No, that's a way to work in the news world. And I believe that this is useful, this is needed. I know I'm not alone in thinking about this. I know that there's other colleagues doing this. And I also think that newspapers are still needed. Otherwise, the forum won't grow and won't be structured in a human and welcoming way for men and women. It will be a place where people will have to walk through very fast and with some weapons to defend themselves. I'm not interested in this. We need to believe in this, and I do believe in it. My ambition in this 50th anniversary of Avvenire, I don't know how many centuries our experience will last, but I hope it will last long. I do hope that the newspaper tool will continue to be available to those who want to keep updated, that want something more than the list of news that are selected for them. So they want to dive into newspaper, and a newspaper in which they trust, and maybe that raises question and show different perspectives and lead people to look at different parts of their life that make them think, even if they have a different opinion. So they are exposed to different views, and this is a good thing to grow and to stop and to think and try and be clearer in one's own quest. So without this kind of experience, we wouldn't be as rich as we are now. The selfie information, as I call it, would be a disaster. It would be a self-referential kind of experience, and excluding other people's histories. So that's really destroying the life of people. But journalism is useful if it can help us take other directions, and I hope that this can be useful in this way. Avvenire is useful in this sense, indeed. I would like to thank all the panelists because they mentioned so many interesting and provocative thoughts. So I would go through a second round of remarks because there are so many points I would like to go back to. Just 3 minutes again to give more comments. So Lucio Brunelli, you have the floor. Yes, I think that there is an interesting issue here, that is, what can we do? Is there an antidote to bad information. Some proposals have been mentioned already, the competencies, the discernment. I remember when I was a young editor in RAI, when the piece of news was released, maybe somebody said there's 10 victims, and the chief editor would say, was this published by the ANSA agency, which is the main agency in Italy? Maybe that was excessive, but there was such a big attention to verify things and taking the time. There was a phrase that used to be said that it was not enough to talk about things or to feel things, but it had to be published by the ANSA agency. So again, we get a lot of information from different sources, from the internet, and today we have to learn to assess those sources, to discern those sources, including Twitter accounts, which can be formidable sources because we have maybe a journalist in the field. You know about this journalist. You can assess how credible this person can be. And this work is being done. It can be done even more in our job. Especially at the beginning, when I started to work for 30 Giorni with the wonderful colleagues, there were people asking me, well, there's this piece of news, and I asked, who said that? And then one came back to me and said, I read it on La Repubblica. And then, but La Repubblica, how did they get the news? Well, they cite local media. And what are those local media? So going back to the origin of a piece of news can be done. It is difficult, but it can be done and should be done. That's what we try to do. Every piece of news must have a father and a mother that take on the responsibility. And one should become skilled enough to assess the credibility of a certain news, the reliability of a source. This is against the cut and paste method that is used so much in our job. There is another article that is old, but is very much a topical one, that is going in the field, outreaching. Many online editors just stay in. They work in the internet with Facebook. They don't really face reality. When they go out, they discover things. That's the beauty of our profession. And when one goes out, one can have the tools to criticize certain things that are circulated, maybe even fake news. We have focused on Central Africa for a while because some Carmelites there invited us to go there and to report their situation. And there is a clash between Islam and Christianity, between Muslims and Christians, Lake Antibalaka. And we went to visit the Carmelites there. They invited us, and our journalist, a very good one, Maurizio Dischino, found that the mission turned into a refugee camp. There's 4,000 refugee people, most of them Muslim people, that are hosted at the parishes of the Carmelites as they are fleeing the violences that were perpetrated at the 5th kilometer of Bagandi. We discovered that the Cardinal of Bangui, the Lion of Bangui, is a good friend of the Imam of the city, and the Imam was his guest at his place at the time. So one understands that the reality is much more complex than it looks like. So this clash is not so inevitable as it appears. So this was just an example of saying that going to do field work and see directly things is still a very important rule. It can be very helpful. Francesco, you were very provocative, so please, can you have other comments? I would like to thank Marco publicly because the work you do in Avvenire has made us left less alone. So thank you for that. And there is a point I wanted to focus on a little bit more. As I said, there's not a problem of fake news, but there is a problem of mood, a mood around a certain topic. And that mood is the one that determines choices. As Marco said, we have the feeling that there is an emergency when the data do not confirm that. Sometimes this happens and people then feel fear. I remember the municipal elections in Rome from some years ago, where there was an emergency that was mentioned, but it wasn't there. So the couple of points here, the notion of proximity that has been referred to, that is sending journalists out or having people next to the piece of news. Proximity is the main structure on which the web is based. Think about a canvas where you have interconnections. Those that are closest to you are the more reliable. I believe that you asked information about measles to a person you knew very well. Well, the case of measles was that there was a big debate online, and there was a big fight among the readers, but of course, the closest you are to a person, the more reliable you can think he or she is. So if there is an agency publishing, if our aunt says something, we tend to believe in our aunts, though they sometimes do not say real things. So here is the big issue. Some people mention that the intermediate infrastructures do not exist anymore, such as trade unions and so on and so forth. But the main intermediate structure that have a role in accessing news online is the family. In the past, TV and the radio were used all together, sitting at a table, and the mother and the father were the first filter in interpreting and understanding the news. But then, when there was a shift to mobile devices, it is hard to have children at a table with whom interaction takes place around the same topic. So the concept of shared public opinion is the main point here, the main nucleus, the main group that should try and recover public opinion is the family. So starting again from there should be the basis. If we don't start from there, and I hope to do it well when I have children, well, one should try to start a shared ground for debating. It is really hard to do it, but it is so fundamental. I agree with what Mr. Piccinini is saying. Well, we have the an illusion. We think that it is a technical issue, an instrumental issue, and sometimes we think that if we turn all the devices off, everything will be fine. But this creates an illusion, the illusion whereby once we turn them on again, we use them correctly. Kid goes to school and he's told to turn his device off, and at home we do the same, and then we expect that when he or she turns it on, this person is able to filter and to manage fake news and hate, etc. We should address it in a different way, so we should really tackle the content. We should ask the kids, what are you doing with your smartphone? We shouldn't just say, turn it off. How long is it that I can use it? Is it 10 minutes or an hour? In 10 minutes, one can really do horrible things online, and in 1 hour, great things can be done. So it's not a matter of time, but the content, the meaning is the main issue here, the meaning of the relations that we build and destroy with the digital tools. And the other thing I want to mention is the demonstration that the problem is not mostly technical, that is, knowing how platforms work is just minimal, plays a minimal role. And this is clear when we think that in our interactions online every day, we sometimes turn into journalists that is able not to be deceived by anybody, that is able to check the sources, that have this perception of feeling that maybe there is something wrong. And we do this when we look for a restaurant, when we want to book a holiday. In this case, we resort to all our skills. And why? Because it is a cultural problem. Capitalism taught us that money is money, and when you have to pay 50 or 80 euros, you take all the necessary time and effort to do what you have to do before spending that money. So the cultural issue is to be aware of this fact that when we adhere to a piece of information, we are giving much more than 50, 80, 100 euros for a holiday. We are accepting that that part of reality is part of our view. So taking that time and the effort to understand whether that part of reality is a reliable one, I believe is something that we should acquire. And I repeat, this is not a cultural and technical problem. And this is demonstrated by the message that you all have received. Tell all the contacts of messengers that Fabrizio Brambilla is a hacker. So with a colleague, we did an experiment. It takes the same time to forward that message to all your messenger contacts and paste that message into Google and check that it is a fake news. So the time is the same. You can decide not to share it, but many people chose to share it. So it is a very close thing. It is not inside the device, but it is us that has to check things. Marco. Just a few words. There is a song by Ivano Fossati, La mia banda suona il rock, my band plays rock, that refer to a couple of things, said that music is hope and music is patience. And I think that the antidote to our times is an information music that can be hope and patience, and that should be built seriously and professionally. Brunelli has referred to discernment and verification of facts. Those who know me know that I think that we journalists can have a future if we can be the guardians of drinking waters of sources of information, not owners but guardians, guardians of democracy, of humanity, guardians of wells of drinking water, because there's so much fake news around, and a lot of patience is needed here to provide the fresh water, drinkable water. And hope is what can make us free, can make our life free. We can do something for the others to have them more aware of the reality they live in, to understand where the world is going and to change things. There are so many wrong things, so many inequalities where men and women are not looked at in the face. We're just numbers. What Bruno Mastroianni said before, well, we book a holiday, but at the same time, the masters of digital channels steal our data and then sell them. Facebook and company gathers so much information, so many data, and we are not totally aware of this. I believe that there's another key word here, that what Piccinini said, that is closeness. If a newspaper or any information tool is not able to have a relation that is a relation of familiarity with readers, there's no sense, there's no point. I think that this will continue to be possible in our world, but it depends on the men and the women that work in the information industry. in such a big turning point of ours. The most beautiful news still have to be written, and they're not necessarily those that are published by the ANSA agency. With the Avvenire newspaper, and we're not alone, have been working a lot with news that are outside the mainstream sources of information. There's a report that we carry out away from the current and topical things that have been set by the professionals, the mainstream professionals. There is a campaign of 4,000 kilometers by Antonio Maria Mira in the south of Italy about exploitation of migrant farmers in the south of Italy was done long before the two accidents that caused casualties. And the farmers are here now, and then the problem of land pollution is really difficult. Nobody used to talk about it. There's so many things to look at in our reality, good things and bad things. Italy that welcomes migrant people, that is there, that is real, and support thousands of people. Well, can you read this in the newspapers more than others' news? So patience and hope. I think this can be accepted as a burden by all of us. We are about to conclude our panel. I need to read a note first. I just want to read the last words that Pope Francis used in his message about fake news and peace journalism with a Franciscan prayer, which reads, Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Help us to recognize the evil latent in a communication that does not build communion. Help us to remove the venom from our judgments. Here is peace journalism. Help us to speak about others, all the others, as our brothers and sisters. You are faithful and trustworthy. May our words be seeds of goodness for the world. It is a prayer and it is a commitment for each and every one of us. So here is the note. What makes the meeting, the Rimini meeting, a unique event is the fact that it is totally free of charge. The exhibitions, the panels, the sports activities, the children's activities, the parking spaces, everything but food can be accessed by everybody for free, and this is really possible because of your contribution. The volunteers, the donors, the donators, the curators, the artists, including the visitors experiencing it. You give your time, your energy, your talent. And this year, again, it is possible to contribute to building the meeting through donations. To this end, in the trade show buildings, you will find desks with the Dona Ora reading and the red heart. That's where you can find volunteers with a purple t-shirt, and you can make your donation there. Thank you and have a nice meeting.